Thank you very much for that unnecessarily long introduction, but I'm delighted to be here. Commandant Middleton, Ambassador Britton, General Williams, the awardees, Montford Point Marines, and invited guests. 1969, well, let me just say this. During World War II, Detroit was known as the city that won the war. It was also the city that won my heart with a young lady I fell in love with, but tragically I didn't marry her. When I was at Michigan State, the Marine Corps recruited some of my fraternity brothers, and they were in the early group of commissioned officers. One was David Northcross. He was my roommate for a while, and he was an outstanding football player. He went in to serve as a successful stockbroker with Merrill Lynch. At the time was headed up by Don Regan, also a Marine. The other was Howard Jackson. I want to take this opportunity to dedicate my remarks today to two outstanding Marines. John Warner, who served in the U.S. Senate. At one point, he was chairman of the Armed Services Committee, and he had been previously Secretary of the Navy under President Nixon, and served as head of the Bicentennial Administration under President Ford. And I sat in the cathedral last Wednesday as the President of the United States, Joe Biden, described Senator Warner as a man of conscience, character, and honor. I have to tell you a little bit about him and why I made this dedication and how he related to General Peterson. I worked for him as one of his deputies at the Bicentennial Administration from 1974 to 1976. I had an incident where we had underwritten a film called America at the Movies. And in this movies, it was produced by the American Film Institute under George Stevens Jr. And in the film, there were no black scenes with, black officers, black troops. Coincidentally, a friend of mine, an actor, Harry Rhodes, was a Montford Point Marine. He wrote a book called The Chosen Few. So I knew Harry. I also knew several Tuskegee Airmen like Lee Archer and Woody Driver. I also had, in addition to the Tuskegee Airmen and Montford Point Marines, my father was a member of the 369th Regiment called the Harlem Hellfighters. And my uncle, through my father's second marriage, Johnny Goins, was a Tuskegee Airman. So I knew I had some history that blacks had served with great distinction in all wars. And the omission sort of sent me off. And John Warner's PR person, another naval officer, wanted me fired. John Warner wouldn't fire me. He set up a special screening at the Kennedy Center, and Betty Shabazz and members of our advisory board attended. And Betty said to me, well, we lost another one. But that says to me a lot about Senator Warner before he was senator. And I wanted to explain that, to put that in context. Also, I got a call from one of my best friends in the military, Frank Peterson. He was a lieutenant colonel and had been passed over for colonel. And he called me up and he said that he was getting out of the Marine Corps. And I said, what? So I ran down the hall and I told John Warner, I said, Frank, and Frank was a legend. Everybody knew Frank Peterson, that had an IQ above room temperature. And he said, the only time John Warner ever raised his voice at me is he yelled, he said, you tell Frank to stay in. Well, the story is that there was a general that had vowed to keep blacks from achieving flag rank as long as he was on active duty, and he was vying to become the commandant. So Frank stayed in, and the resistance subsided, and he went on to make full colonel, Byrd. Then he made brigadier general, and then he got his second star and his third star. And I'll tell you about when he made flag. The other thing is that I went with John Warner, and at the time he was dating, that's not important, but I went to the evening parade and I met General Wilson and Colonel Krulak and some of the members of the Marine leadership. And we had a great time. So after the bicentennial, ended, I told him I was going to support Jimmy Carter and Walter Mondale. I said I had met Carter when he was governor, and he gave the keynote address to a convention where I was on the board of the American Society of Planning Officials. And I said I had a relationship with Senator Mondale, and I sent a telegram to President Carter during a convention urging him to select Senator Mondale as his running mate. So John Warner looked at me, a staunch Republican, as I had been in 2 administrations, and he said, "Commander, you're doing the right thing." So I got out, and we know how that turned out. So when, and I worked in his campaign, by the way, when Dick Obenshane, who was running, he had a plane crash, I was in LA trying to get work as an actor, and I called him up and I said, "I want to work in your campaign." So I came back, to Virginia. I worked in his campaign. He won by less than 5,000 votes, and he called me up and he said, "The first letter I sent to my mother, the second letter I'm sending to you." He also took an address that General Peterson then gave to Virginia Union, and he had that read into the congressional record. And he also facilitated the naming of a ship after Admiral Gravely, who was a close friend of his. They were both into pigeons, and they knew each other very well. And he facilitated the commissioning of DDG 107. Admiral Gravely and I were in Hawaii together, along with General Peterson and others. So that's much about, I want to say about John Warner. And he deserves all the recognition he can achieve. And a submarine, Virginia-class submarine, was named after him several years ago. And that was quite a ceremony. I want to say a few words about General Peterson. He was born in March of 1932, deceased 25 August 2015. I was with him the day before he headed west, as we say in the aviation community. He was from Topeka, Kansas, and he went to the school that was the case of Board versus Topeka in 1954. He graduated years before the decision. After flight school, Frank Peterson said he just wanted to be the best fighter pilot. We met in 1960 in Hawaii. I was in a squadron, a patrol squadron, flying patrol planes, obviously, and in March of 1960. And I went to the barbershop at the bachelor officers' quarters, and the Hawaiian barber wouldn't cut my hair. And he ran out at the barbershop. So I found out there was a black barbershop in Honolulu, in Oahu, near Hotel Street, the Esquire Barbershop. So I went down there to get a haircut. And I'm sitting there, and walks in this ramrod straight Marine. And I was very intimidated because he was a captain, I was an ensign, and ensigns are not supposed to speak to anybody. So I sat there and I got my nerve up and I said, "Excuse me, sir." I said, "I'm Ensign Campbell." And he runs over to the chair, puts his hand out, and he said, "Frank Peterson, VMF 232. And that began an incredible friendship over the years. So he was in an F-8 squadron, a fighter squadron. And I got transferred to another squadron at Moffett Field, VP 19. He was in Cherry Point, North Carolina, and he called me up one day and he said, "Be out in the tarmac in about 2.5, 2.5 hours. So I'm out there, and in comes this Phantom 4 the F-4, and with two Phantoms, and he comes in, he lands. I walk out into the tarmac, and I saluted him. He salutes me back, and he said, "We're going to gas and go." He turns around and goes back after they refuel, and they had one in-flight refueling halfway across the United States. And he did the most incredible section takeoff, 2 aircraft at the same time on parallel runways. And he went back. 1968, he got command of a squadron in Vietnam, leaving out some significant history. He was the first black aviator in the Marine Corps. He was the first black to become the commanding officer of a Marine squadron. He flew over 350 missions, over 7,000 hours. And after that Passover, he went on to ascend to the highest ranks. On the 21st of June, 1967, well, let me just say for the record, on the 12th of June, 1986, he made Lieutenant General. And a year later, he gave a speech at Virginia Union at their commencement. And he said, if you were to ask me about the missions he flew in combat in Korea and Vietnam, he would tell you about the courage of his squadron mates. He said, I would tell you about the Marines who would return to battle after being treated for wounds sustained in combat. He said, I would tell you they were the best. They were prepared and always faithful. And he said, humility is the province of the courageous, and arrogance is that of cowards. And he said, let your failures become springboards toward great achievements. Let your success render you sober so they can be sustained through the torment of howling winds. He said, prepare, pursue, perform, and you will prevail. So that puts, in some respects, General Peterson in perspective. And it's hard to describe, everything about him. But after the funeral service, he passed away in August of 2015, and there was a service at the Naval Academy Chapel. I was privileged to speak. And afterwards, I turned to Buddy Penn, who had been Secretary of the Navy on an acting basis, but he was with us in Hawaii. And I said, Buddy, we've got to get a ship named after Frank. And within days, he got a hold of Secretary Ray Mabus, who had been governor of Mississippi and ambassador to Saudi Arabia, and Secretary of the Navy. And he had the authority to name the ship. And he made it happen, and because of Buddy's intervention. I'm pleased to say that in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we have a long tradition of Marines as elected officials. In addition to Senator Warner, we had Senator Chuck Robb, and I worked in his campaign, Senator Jim Webb, I worked in his campaign, and Attorney General Marshall Coleman. So I have a great amount of respect for Marines. 2 of my business partners are Marines. Eric Wallace, he graduated from the Naval Academy and went to the Marine Corps, became an officer, and received an MBA from Wharton. John Oxendine is a Marine. There are no ex-Marines, as we know. And he got a Harvard MBA. He's doing some incredible things. Let me pause to focus on the Montford Point Marines. Fidelity is the point of departure. And the model of the Marine Corps is Semper Fidelis, always faithful. Let me put faith in context. When Martin Luther King spoke at Stanford University in 1967, he referred to the book of Daniel. And he talked about how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would not pay homage to the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. And as a result, they had committed to the fiery furnace. Because their faith was not an if faith, if being a conditional faith. Their faith was a though faith, and the though faith was a faith that was unconditional. I'm going to simplify it. And they were rescued by their God from the fiery furnace. That was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And that puts unconditional faith. And in my opinion, that describes the faith of the Marines and the Montford Point Marines. No matter what, you keep going. And so, from the crucible of Jim Crow to the cornucopia of civil rights, the Tuskegee Airmen, the Harlem Hellfighters, the Golden 13, the Triple Nickels, and the Montford Point Marines changed the trajectory of civil rights in America. Because after that, and I put them all together because I think in each and every way, they, some got more attention than others, like the Tuskegee Airmen, but they exemplified the kind of unconditional faith that was an inspiration. And even though people were not getting the full benefits of the Constitution and the full rights that were defended in combat, they persevered. And following World War II, we had the President of the United States, Harry Truman, issue an executive order to integrate all of the services. We had the Brown decision, Brown versus Board of Topeka, the hometown of General Peterson. We had the 1964 Civil Rights Act on public accommodations, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, Bloody Sunday on voting, the 1968 Civil Rights Act on fair housing. And yet, polarization, segregation remains. Racism, sexism, xenophobia, now lookism, anti-Semitism, and homophobia. 22 states have recently enacted what I would call anti-voting measures. Let me say, Margaret Mead, who wrote the epilogue to my book on New Towns, said when you study others, you learn about yourself. And we have a lot of lessons to learn by observing what is happening in this country. We have to realize, as President Biden said, empathy is the fuel of democracy, and that we are moved to challenge many areas if we can resolve the challenges. Let us start with the big lie that is ripping this country apart about the outcome of the last election. Joseph Goebbels, who was a propaganda minister under Hitler, said if you repeat a lie often enough, people will believe it, and you will even come to believe it yourself. Rene Descartes, he said, natural light teaches us that when there is deception, it is because of a defect. And the reign of chaos is underway in the United States. There was a Unite the Right demonstration on the 12th of August in 2017 in Charlottesville, Virginia. On the 27th of October 2018, there was a Tree of Life murders, Squirrel Hill, this Tree of Life synagogue. I think 6 people or 11 people were murdered and others were wounded. And then on the 6th of January, the United States Capitol was under siege with Trump supporters. The Big Lie. There's a book I would commend to your attention called In the Garden of the Beast about Germany in the 30s, written by Eric Erikson. So we have challenges, and that is to confront racism, anti-Semitism, sexism, lookism. The night that Bill Russell received the Medal of Freedom from President Obama, I had dinner with Russ, Jim Brown, and Joe Morgan. And one of the things they said was that the younger generation would not appreciate the price they had to pay off the field and off the court. And I think the story, the Montford Point Marine story, needs to be told. It really needs to be out there. And there are great challenges that need to be met. Today, there are about 40,000 homeless veterans on the streets of the United States, a lot in California. In World War II, we built over 700 POW camps to house 425,000 POWs. The war's not over until the veterans are housed, and we have to make sure that the veterans are housed. So we have to move forward. There's a message coming from Montford Point. And somebody amongst the Montford Point Marines must have heard or read about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the book of Daniel. Somebody must have seen the inscription on a synagogue in Newtown, Pennsylvania that said, "Remember the past, live the present, and trust the future." And somebody at Montford Point must have spoke about Pericles, the emperor of Greece during the Golden Age. And he said the challenge is to participate. And somebody must have known that one day Nelson Mandela would say, "We are here to manifest the glory of God that is within us." And somebody must have read the prophet Isaiah, who said, "Behold, I have molded you not in silver, but in the furnace of affliction." And somebody must have known that one day a young Baptist minister from Atlanta, Georgia, would lead a bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, and tell the people that they had a choice between walking in dignity or riding in humiliation. And somebody had to say that Rene Dubois was right when he said, "Survival alone is not enough." What is the legacy of Montford Point? The mayor of New York City, David Dinkins, ambassador to Barbados, former ambassador to Barbados, Theodore Britton, a very, very rambunctious, successful, no-nonsense member of the City Council of Philadelphia, Cecil Moore. These are all Montford Point Marines. The Montford Point Marines fought in Iwo Jima, so drove the ducks below Mount Suribachi, in Guam, Saipan, and other campaigns in the Pacific. Let me pause and tell you a little bit about the flag story. The flag story is when the Navy and the Army and the Air Force and Marine Corps transitioned and took that ceiling away that had stopped the ascension of heroic blacks. And what happened? The President of the United States had an aide named Robert Brown. And the President told Bob Brown to go over to the Pentagon and to meet with the Secretary of Defense and to break the logjam to get blacks appointed to the flag ranks, Admiral in the Navy and General in the Marine Corps and the other services. And there was, at the time, as things began to move forward, John Warner was Secretary of the Navy, and Admiral Zumwalt was the Chief of Naval Operations. And there were disagreements and some resistance, but at the end of the day, there was a breakthrough. Sam Gravely became the first black admiral in the Navy. He started out 2 stars, 3 stars. He ended up as a vice admiral. And so, in the Marine Corps, today, historically, there have been over 28 blacks at the flag level, including General Williams. 9 today are on active duty, 3 are major generals, 6 brigadier generals. In the Navy, 59 flag officers, 7 on active, 14 aviators, 3 4-stars, Cecil Haney, Paul Reason, Michelle Howard. Michelle Howard was Vice Chief of Naval Operations, and the Secretary of Defense, Austin. So the legacy is very strong, and a lot has been accomplished. But the story of Montford Point, like the story of other youths that organizations that at one time were segregated, has not been told. And I'm delighted that under the leadership of Commander Middleton, you're about the business of developing a museum in Detroit that will basically house the military achievements of blacks in history. And that would include, of course, the Triple Nickels, the Golden 13, Tuskegee Airmen, the Montford Point Marines. Powerful history, powerful incentives, and an incredible legacy. I want to thank you for this opportunity.